Number 10. The day the sky rained acid. Imagine waking up, stretching, grabbing your morning coffee, and then realizing the sky itself has decided to spit battery acid directly onto your face. That's not just a metal album cover, it's an actual thing that has happened on Earth. Acid rain isn't some niche environmental activist scare story. It's a chemical hangover our atmosphere occasionally throws after we've dumped way too much junk into it. Back in the 20th century, especially during the industrial boom, factories belched out so much sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides that the atmosphere basically said, "Fine, I'll mix this with water and yeet it back down on you." Congratulations, you've just invented corrosive rainfall. Entire forests turned into skeletal graveyards, lakes became poison soup, and buildings eroded like sugar cubes under a faucet. Now, here's the creepy part. Humans had to live through this. Imagine your house's roof literally melting while your lungs quietly corrode every time you take a breath. Scandinavian countries in the 1970s and 80s were particularly hard hit, with lakes so acidic that fish basically gave up and rolled belly up like they were auditioning for a seafood buffet. And if you think it was just some minor environmental inconvenience, people who lived near these regions reported constant respiratory problems, burning eyes, and skin irritation. You'd walk outside and feel like the atmosphere had turned into a passive-aggressive ex with a spray bottle of lemon juice. The science behind it is disturbingly simple. When fossil fuels burn, sulfur dioxide and nitrogen oxides rise to the sky, mix with water vapor, and come down as acidic precipitation, sometimes with a pH lower than vinegar. Your body, which is already a fragile meat balloon, is not designed to withstand constant exposure to diluted battery fluid, and yet millions of people somehow did. Even weirder, it wasn't one of those cinematic one-off events, like the sky caught fire once and everyone panicked. Acid rain lingered for decades, quietly eating away at ecosystems and towns. The fact that humans just shrugged and went about their day while their monuments and lungs eroded in slow motion, that's peak survival mode. You don't even fight it. You just adapt like, oh yeah, don't go fishing in that lake unless you want radioactive sushi. Basically, our atmosphere became a vindictive chemistry set, and we somehow endured long enough to regulate emissions and stop the worst of it, which is impressive considering the only thing standing between survival and being dissolved like a gummy bear in Sprite was legislation passed by politicians who probably couldn't spell nitrogen oxide.
Number 9. The night the ocean exploded. Picture this. You're living in a quiet village near a peaceful lake in Cameroon. The water looks calm, the moonlight is soft, everything feels safe. Then, out of nowhere, the lake belches like it just downed 10 kegs of soda and wipes out thousands of lives in seconds. No fire, no lava, no earthquake, just air. That's the night Lake Nyos exploded. In 1986, this volcanic lake suddenly released a massive cloud of carbon dioxide. Invisible, silent, and heavier than air, it rolled downhill like a creeping death blanket. People didn't even realize what was happening. One minute they were sleeping, the next they simply never woke up. Within hours, around 1,700 people and thousands of animals were dead. Not burned, not drowned, but suffocated by the earth itself, casually burping poison gas. Here's the creepy science. Volcanic lakes like Nyos sit on top of magma, which slowly leaks carbon dioxide into the water. Normally, the gas stays dissolved under pressure, like a shaken soda can waiting for someone to open it. But when conditions shift, say a landslide or a sudden change in temperature, the lake flips, releasing all that CO2 in a catastrophic burst. Basically, the entire body of water turned into a giant Coke bottle shaken for centuries, then popped open at once. Survivors described the aftermath as apocalyptic. Villages were silent, livestock lay scattered like eerie statues, and the air smelled faintly acidic. Some who lived through it only did so because they happened to be higher up on hills, above the creeping gas. Imagine watching an invisible killer roll past your home while your neighbors vanish without a sound. No flames, no debris, just silence. That's scarier than any explosion Michael Bay could direct. And the somehow survived part It's the fact that entire communities had to come back and live near that same lake afterward, knowing it could theoretically burp again. The government eventually installed degassing pipes, giant straws sucking CO2 from the lake's depths like some cursed milkshake. But the paranoia never fully left. You'd never look at a calm lake the same way again. Think about it. Humans have survived earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, all violent, noisy disasters. But this was death by quiet. No warning, no spectacle, just a suffocating wave of nothingness. And somehow we adapted, studied it, and engineered our way around it. Because apparently, not even the planet casually exhaling death gas is enough to make people permanently move away.
Number 8. The tornado made of fire. You know what's worse than a tornado? A tornado made out of fire. That's not just a sci-fi movie plot nobody asked for. It's an actual phenomenon called a fire world. And yes, humans have witnessed and survived them. Which is insane, because how do you even mentally process a flaming tornado charging at your house? Let's rewind to Tokyo, 1923. A massive earthquake hit, triggering fires across the city. And when you mix an inferno with the right wind conditions, you don't just get flames. You get a firestorm so hot it starts spiraling like it's auditioning for America's deadliest weather patterns. Eyewitnesses described walls of fire rising into the sky, swirling and moving with tornado-like force. Entire neighborhoods were incinerated in minutes. The creepiest part? Fire worlds don't just burn, they suck. Literally. The intense updraft pulls oxygen, debris, and sometimes entire people off the ground. Survivors of these firestorms reported watching friends and neighbors vanish into fiery cyclones, leaving nothing but ash and melted shadows on the ground. And you thought regular tornadoes were bad. The psychology of surviving this is just as disturbing. Imagine hiding in a half-collapsed building, praying the flames don't notice you, while outside a 300-foot-tall spinning vortex of fire dances down the street. What's the survival plan? You can't fight it, you can't outrun it, you just hope the physics gods decide to spare your specific patch of Earth. Science says fire whirls happen when extreme heat meets turbulent wind, creating spinning columns of flame that can last for minutes, sometimes hours. And when they hit urban areas, those minutes are long enough to erase entire city blocks. But the fact that anyone, even a single person, managed to live through this by hiding in wells, underground spaces, or sheer dumb luck, that's survival on nightmare mode. The Tokyo quake alone killed over 100,000 people, many due to these infernal twisters. And yet, some walked away, scourged, traumatized, but alive. Which is honestly incredible, because if I saw a tornado made of hellfire barreling toward me, I just assumed Earth was uninstalling itself and lay down to accept my fate.
Number 7. The volcano that froze the world. When you hear volcano, you probably think lava rivers, ash clouds, maybe some Pompeii-style statues of people caught mid-scream. What you don't think is, wow, that volcano turned summer into winter. But that's exactly what happened in 1815 when Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted so violently, it basically trolled the entire planet's weather system. The eruption was so massive, it ejected over 100 cubic kilometers of material into the atmosphere. That's not big bonfire big, that's literally heard thousands of miles away big. And the ash cloud? It wrapped around the Earth, blocking sunlight like the planet had suddenly installed blackout curtains. Welcome to the year without a summer. Now, imagine being a farmer in New England in 1816. One day, it's June, you're planting crops, expecting sunshine. Then, surprise, it starts snowing in June. Frost killed harvests, livestock starved, and people literally ate boiled weeds to stay alive. Europe wasn't much better. Famine, riots, and disease outbreaks followed like unwanted sequels. And here's where the creep factor skyrockets. This disaster didn't just ruin harvests, it reshaped culture. The gloomy, ash-dimmed skies inspired literature like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Basically, one volcano was so extra it invented Gothic horror. Meanwhile, average families were just trying not to starve while their summer garden looked like a freezer aisle. Science-wise, the eruption spewed sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere, forming aerosols that reflected sunlight.
Temperature drops were global, with an average decrease of 3 degrees Celsius. Doesn't sound like much, right? Wrong. For agriculture, that's catastrophic. Think famine, starvation, mass migration. And somehow humans still endured. They adapted diets, traded across regions, and literally invented new recipes just to make gross survival food edible. The people who lived through this had no idea what a volcanic aerosol was. They just thought the sun got depressed and ghosted humanity for a year. And that's the real creepiness. Surviving something you don't even understand. You're freezing in June, your crops are dead, and all you can do is pray the sun decides to come back. Spoiler, it did, but not before leaving behind mass graves and a permanent scar in the collective memory of anyone who lived through winter in July. Basically, Mount Tambora was the ultimate chaos agent. It didn't just kill nearby villages, it reached across the planet, slapped everyone's food supply, and casually inspired Gothic literature in the process. And yet humans, stubborn cockroaches that we are, didn't vanish. We just grumbled, wrote scary novels, and survived on weeds and sadness.
Number 6. The wave taller than buildings. Close your eyes and imagine this. You're standing on the coast enjoying a calm day when suddenly the ocean decides it's done pretending to be chill and rears up into a wall of water taller than your house. That's a tsunami. Nature's way of reminding you that yes, water is heavy enough to snap skyscrapers like toothpicks. One of the most infamous, the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami. Triggered by a massive undersea earthquake, the wave ripped across 14 countries, killing over 230,000 people in just a few hours. To put that into perspective, that's like the population of an entire city getting erased before lunch. And yet, people survived. Against all odds, entire families clung to palm trees, floated on doors like real-life Titanic extras, or sprinted inland with seconds to spare. Here's where it gets even more chilling. Survivors describe the moment before the wave hit as eerie silence. The ocean pulled back dramatically, exposing the seafloor, fish flopping, boats stranded, kids running out to grab seashells, and then boom, a towering wall of water charged forward with the force of multiple nuclear bombs. Imagine thinking, wow, free seashells, and then turning to see the ocean itself sprinting toward you like an angry linebacker. The science behind tsunamis is cruel in its simplicity. An underwater earthquake shifts the seabed, displacing millions of tons of water, which spreads out as giant waves. By the time they hit shallow coastlines, they can be over 100 feet tall and travel faster than a jetliner. You can't outrun them, you can't outswim them, your only shot is height, luck, or a miracle. The survival stories, though, are jaw-dropping. A 10-year-old girl in Thailand recognized the warning signs from a geography lesson about tsunamis and convinced her family to flee. Entire villages survived just because one person noticed the ocean behaving weirdly and screamed at everyone to run. Others clung to debris for hours, floating in wreckage while the ocean decided whether to keep them or spit them back. What's creepier than a wave taller than buildings? The randomness of survival. Two people standing side by side, one gone in seconds, the other somehow washed inland alive. It's a brutal reminder that when Earth gets moody, survival isn't always about strength. Sometimes it's just about being in the right place when physics decides to ruin everything.
Number 5. The storm that shredded flesh. Picture a thunderstorm so violent that rain doesn't fall, it stabs. That's what happened during the Great Hailstorm of 1888 in India, when hailstones the size of grapefruits plummeted from the sky, shredding crops, smashing homes, and killing over 200 people outright. Survivors described the storm as if the heavens had loaded up a machine gun and fired chunks of ice at them non-stop. If you've ever been smacked by a pea-sized hailstone, you know it hurts. Now scale that up to cricket ball-sized chunks of ice falling at terminal velocity. That's like being pelted with rocks from the sky, except colder and with bone-as-blunt force trauma. People were literally knocked unconscious, livestock died by the thousands, and survivors crawled out of the storm with bruises and broken bones. And this isn't some one-time freak event from a forgotten century. Giant hailstorms still happen today. In 2020, Argentina saw hailstones so huge they had to be measured with rulers. Cars were destroyed, roofs collapsed, and yes, people still somehow lived through it. Imagine stepping outside to grab groceries and being brained by a frozen softball moving at 90 miles per hour. Instant concussion, courtesy of the weather. Here's the science. Hail forms when powerful updrafts inside thunderstorms keep raindrops cycling upward into freezing layers of the atmosphere. They gather layers of ice, get heavier, then finally plummet once gravity wins. The stronger the storm, the bigger the hailstones. In other words, it's atmospheric pinball and your skull is the target. Now, the creepy part of survival isn't just people lived through this, it's how they lived. Families huddled in caves, hid under dead animals, or even shielded themselves with corpses of livestock to avoid being turned into human piñatas. Some were left scarred for life, both physically and mentally. Because how do you go back to enjoying a gentle spring drizzle when you've seen the sky literally throw ice grenades at your village? Surviving a hailstorm of that scale feels less like weather and more like dodging artillery in a war zone. And the worst part? There's no warning, no duck and cover, no run inland. Just 1 second you're tending crops, the next you're getting smacked with frozen death falling from the sky. Humans somehow walked away from this madness, proving once again that we're basically just really stubborn cockroaches with health insurance.
Number 4. The day the river boiled. Imagine walking to your local river for a swim and realizing the water isn't cool and refreshing. It's literally boiling. Like tea kettle levels of boiling. That's not a horror story. It's a real place. The Shanai Tempishka, aka the boiling river of the Amazon. Now here's the unsettling part. The river isn't next to a volcano. It just is hot. For nearly 4 miles, this stretch of river runs at temperatures so high, it can cook animals alive. Birds that fall in literally poach in the seconds. Indigenous legends long spoke of a river that burned with the anger of the gods, but Western science didn't confirm it until relatively recently. And the first thought researchers had? Why are humans even near this? Survivors of accidental falls into the river describe horrifying burns, flesh peeling instantly, and the desperate scramble to crawl back onto land before their limbs give out. Imagine tripping in shallow water and coming out looking like you tried to high-five a stovetop. Science suspects geothermal heat from underground fault lines superheats the water, but here's the nightmare fuel. Rivers like this shouldn't exist so far from volcanic activity. It's basically like finding a random oven in the middle of the forest. So how did humans survive living next to this death trap? Adaptation. Locals learned to respect it, build around it, and use it for rituals and medicine. They survived by coexisting with a natural phenomenon that looks like pure myth, which is kind of the human story in a nutshell. Yes, the river is literally boiling our cattle alive, but hey, it's home. Creepiest part? If you fell in and managed to crawl out, you'd still have to survive the jungle, with third-degree burns, infections, and no hospital in sight. And yet, stories exist of people doing exactly that. Walking burn victims who beat the odds, scarred but alive, proving that sometimes sheer stubbornness outweighs physics.
Number 3. The night the ground turned to liquid. If the earth under your feet suddenly decided to behave like quicksand, would you survive? Well, some people did, thanks to the nightmare phenomenon known as soil liquefaction. And if you've never heard of it, congratulations, your sense of security will never be the same. This happens during certain earthquakes. The violent shaking causes loosely packed, water-saturated soil to lose its strength, basically transforming into liquid. Imagine standing on solid ground 1 second, then sinking into pudding the next. Entire buildings tilt and collapse as though swallowed whole, and streets ripple like someone kicked the planet's jello mold. One of the worst cases? The 1964 Niigata earthquake in Japan.
Whole apartment buildings toppled over intact, like Lego sets nudged by a toddler. Cars sunk nose first into the ground, and survivors described running across streets that buckled and rolled under their feet like carnival funhouse floors. Except instead of laughing, you're screaming and wondering why your driveway suddenly turned into a slip and slide of death. The creepy science behind it is that water pressure in the soil increases during quakes, pushing particles apart and suspending them in water. The result? The ground literally loses its ability to support weight. It's as if the planet suddenly decided, you know what, I quit being solid. And yet, people somehow lived through this chaos. Some escaped collapsing homes by sheer reflex, leaping out as walls tilted. Others crawled over sinking ground while watching cars and houses vanish beside them. Survival meant sprinting over terrain that acted more like quicksand than earth, while aftershocks made it worse. The aftermath was equally disturbing. Entire neighborhoods stood sideways like giant dominoes mid-fall. Survivors rebuilt, but the memory of watching their world literally melt beneath them never left. Because how do you trust the ground again after it tried to eat you alive? Basically, liquefaction turns Earth's most reliable feature, solid ground, into a deadly illusion. And the fact that people still manage to crawl, climb, or run their way out of it, that's survival on nightmare physics mode.
Number 2. The night the sky ripped apart. Imagine sitting outside on a calm night when suddenly the sky lights up so brightly you think the sun just rage quit its orbit and decided to drop in early. No sound, no warning, just a flash that makes midnight look like high noon. That's what happened during the Tunguska event of 1908 in Siberia, when a mysterious explosion flattened 800 square miles of forest. Now here's the creepy part. There was no crater, no obvious impact site, just millions of trees scorched and knocked over like matchsticks, and reports of reindeer and wildlife vaporized where they stood. Witnesses described a fireball streaking across the sky, followed by a shockwave that knocked people unconscious 40 miles away. Imagine waking up on the ground to see the horizon still glowing orange, as if the world itself had been set on fire. Science today thinks it was a comet or asteroid exploding mid-air, an airburst releasing energy equivalent to 185 Hiroshima bombs. Basically, space threw a rock at Earth, missed the direct hit, but still punched hard enough to erase a forest the size of a small country. And somehow, people nearby survived. Why? Because Siberia is huge and mostly empty. If Tunguska had happened over London or New York, millions would have been obliterated in seconds. Survivors told tales of shockwaves blasting windows, animals stampeding, and the ground rumbling like a train passing underfoot. And the psychological aftermath? Generations of locals carried myths about gods or curses punishing the land. Which, honestly, is fair. How do you explain the sky exploding when your only science textbook is, sometimes the weather gets weird? The fact that humans walked away from this event at all feels like sheer luck. Earth basically took a cosmic sucker punch and somehow we got to keep playing. But every time you look up at the stars, remember, survival here wasn't strategy. It was geography. If you happened to be standing in the wrong valley that day, you weren't surviving anything.
Number 1. The wave of black death from the sea. Okay, final boss time. Because if you thought tsunamis and exploding lakes were bad, wait until you hear about the 1883 eruption of Krakatoa, an event so violent it didn't just kill people, it literally erased part of the Earth's map. The volcano exploded with such force that the sound was heard 3,000 miles away. Sailors in Australia reported their ears bleeding. Pressure waves circled the globe multiple times, and tsunamis over 100 feet high smashed into coastlines, obliterating villages in minutes. Over 36,000 people died, and the sky turned so dark from ash that sunsets across the world glowed blood red for months. Imagine living in Europe, thousands of miles away, and thinking the apocalypse had casually clocked in. But here's where it gets terrifying.
Survivors described the ocean itself turning into a black wall of water, filled with ash, pumice, and burning debris. Not just a wave that carried literal fire and stone inside it. If normal tsunamis are like getting hit by liquid concrete, Krakatoa's were like being steamrolled by molten cement trucks. Science says the eruption expelled 25 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and gas, enough to alter global climate for years. Temperatures dropped worldwide, harvests failed, and even art changed. Painters like Edvard Munch credited Krakatoa's fiery sunsets as inspiration for The Scream. So yeah, this volcano traumatized not just survivors, but also the entire cultural imagination of humanity. And yet, survival stories emerged. Entire families lived by sheer coincidence. They were inland, on higher ground, or happened to leave before the waves hit. Sailors caught in the ocean rode out black tsunamis by clinging to debris for days, sunburned, starving, but alive. Others dug into high cliffs and prayed while fire and water swallowed their towns below. The creepiest part? Krakatoa wasn't even the end of the line. The volcano rebuilt itself over the next century. Today, a new cone rises from the sea, known as Anak Krakatoa, meaning child of Krakatoa. And it's still active. People literally live near it, on purpose, because apparently humans looked at one of the deadliest disasters in recorded history and thought, good real estate. Basically, Krakatoa was nature's mic drop. It screamed louder than any bomb we've ever built, shook the earth, killed tens of thousands, and people still crawled out of the rubble, scarred, traumatized, but alive. Because that's what we do, stubbornly survive even when the planet is clearly trying to uninstall us. That's all for today. I'll be making similar videos in the future. Subscribe to see them.